Kia ora koutou. Welcome along to our workshop this morning, looking at our long-term plan. We've got apologies from Megan Mackay. Elizabeth will be leaving early at the end of the day today, and Councillor Hassan's online. We have got a number of things on the agenda across our whole day today, but the first couple of hours this morning are on long-term plan workshop. So let's kick in to that work. Thank you to the team for the preparation of the documentation shared, and councillors for taking the time to read through that and being prepared for today. And Sharon, do you want to say anything to start the
day? No, thank you. Just I'm really pleased with the work that the team has done, and we're delighted to bring a suite of refreshed policies to the table. So just recognising the great work. So thank you.
Morena, and welcome to today. So our agenda for today is around socialising our LTP related policy changes, and also from the last workshop that we had, we also said that we'll come back and discuss with you the updated set of community outcomes following the workshop and the feedback that we received on that. We also have an adjusted LTP timeline, which I'd like to share at the end of the session, just so we know where we're going in terms of direction of travel. So the LTP policies and key changes proposed. How we're going to run the session today is that we're going to go through policy by policy, and that allows our team here will give you an overview of the changes and the rationale for that, and then we'll have an opportunity to take questions on each policy as we go through. It just keeps it a bit tidier. And firstly, I'd like to introduce to you, I don't think you've had the opportunity to meet Jodie before. This is Jodie Flowerday. Jodie works in my team, and she's been doing a lot of coordinating a lot of the background work for the LTP and making sure that all our essential documentation and all the things that we need to do to be legislatively compliant, as well as be do good things that council should do as part of the LTP process. So Jodie's been working on that, and she's going to take us through the LTP policies today with the support of subject matter experts. So Jodie, welcome.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to the work that I have been undertaking as part of the LTP today. Next slide, Jen. Thank you.
Can you move your microphone just a bit nearer, please, Jodie?
How's that? Is that better? Cool. Okay. I'll just take you through the slide, an overview of the slide, and just sort of explain the process that we went through to identify which policies we would need to review as part of the LTP. And as you can see on the slide, they're divided into sort of three categories. One that we actually have to have in the LTP, so required under the LGA to include it within the LTP. Others that are critical to LTP development that really sort of tell our story. And then a third category of policies that we had in the last LTP, but either are not necessarily critical or tell our LTP story. And some of these also have not had any significant changes to them as well. So what we did is we looked at policies that were included in the current LTP or contributed to the LTP content. Yep. We focused on the legislative requirements of the Local Government Act, but also Tai Te Ara guidance around telling one cohesive story within the LTP about and which policies will help us do that. We looked at what policies were included in LTP sort of across the sector as well to help us make sure that we were on the right track with the policies that we wanted to review and include within this LTP. And we also looked at good examples of policy drafting and design, and this included looking at the Department of Internal Affairs regarding the Development Contributions Policy and a few other councils in the South Island where there was good formatting, good structure, and sort of a design that we were inspired by for this LTP. Next slide. Oh, sorry. No, sorry, go back one.
Okay, no problem.
So an overview of the policy review process. It's been a little bit different to what I understand has been a policy review process that's been undertaken previously during the LTP. So essentially it's a six-step process. The way that we've depicted the process is linear, but the reality is that we've gone forward steps, back steps. We've had some steps have overlaid throughout the whole entire process. So even though it's depicted linearly there, that's not necessarily how things have happened. Things have gone around, back and forth and also overlaid. So for example, Te Pou Mataho, they have been involved at each step of the process, essentially, for certain policies. So the policy review process, as I mentioned, has been different years. It's been a different way of working. We've had a lot more involvement from subject matter experts this time around. We actually have lost quite a few subject matter experts in the policy space. And my understanding is that there are a lot of policy experts that undertook and led the process, and they are no longer with us. So we had to identify new subject matter experts and bring them on board and get them involved in the process. So that's meant there's been way more collaboration across council, and there's been a lot of different stakeholders involved. And that include people who are administering and implementing the policy at the ground versus sort of the strategic decision makers. Next slide, Jen. So the key changes to the policies have really been driven by the five, outcomes that we have depicted on this slide here. What we really wanted was to achieve fit for purpose and compliant policies, reduce any ambiguities that had arisen in terms of the policy application or implementation. We wanted to make sure that the policies were constructed and formatted in a way that's actually easy to engage with and understand. We also wanted to look at how we could improve the policy review process, and we wanted to look at consistency in policy drafting and review practice across the organisation. Thanks, Jen. Next slide. So the first policy that we're going to talk to in depth today is the development contributions policy. Now, I'm not a subject matter expert at all in this field. So what I will do is I will invite our subject matter experts to come and talk to certain slides that we have on this. And I'll invite Andrew to come and sort of explain and just chat to this slide. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Feel free to come and use one of the seats on the side, Andrew. Yeah.
Okay.
This slide.
Move Andrew, sit up there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. So yeah, I'm just going to give you a bit of a rundown of where we've got to with the new and updated development contribution policy. So we've undertaken a major review of the policy amongst and across the teams that are involved with it, including Rachel's team, in terms of trying to get this a little bit more fit for purpose. And we have been aware, as we've been doing this, of the council's desire to make sure that we're maximising our revenue streams in terms of from this avenue. I think when we talked about it a couple of weeks ago with Sharon, one of the important parts of the policy was just being able to provide a clear and concise introduction to the policy that explained how development contributions worked in a very general sense. So if anybody picked up the policy, hopefully they could get the gist of it very quickly, as opposed to being bogged down in a whole lot of policy and figures and numbers and things like that. So where we've concentrated on with the policy is obviously we've gone through it and reworked the structure into something a little bit more appropriate and easier to follow. But in behind all that, there has been a lot of work that's been done to actually review the mechanics of the policy in terms of how DCs are calculated, and also in terms of in regards to the fundamentals in regards to the rates that are applied on how DCs are calculated. And so basically we've gone through, made it clearer and more defendable. It has to follow a legislative process or legislative requirements under the Local Government Act. So we've always got to be mindful of needing to follow that. We just can't go veering off into our own interpretation of what that may be. The other thing too is that obviously the development contributions is very much linked to our CapEx program. It's around that. Development contributions can only be collected on the growth component of a particular major project. You can't collect development contributions for things like maintenance or renewals or levels of service change. And, an example of that may be, for instance, we could decide that we may reseal all our roads with nice smooth asphalt. We can't collect DCs for that. There's an example. So we also looked at in terms of trying to, from a transport perspective, work out a different way to actually capture more of the demand and the growth that is related to transport aspects. And so where previously we had been working on the basis of looking at development contributions on a household unit equivalent basis and on average daily flow, we've actually looked and changed that to work on peak hour. So that is actually a better, what we feel is a better representation of the demand that's put on our infrastructure and our roading assets from that perspective. And we've done some work around making sure that we're lined up and we're still in general accordance with what our previous policy or our current policy is generating in that regard. So again, we're not veering off into something that's way different to what we've had before, but it's a better way of doing things. That's been able to be achieved in regards to being able to link to some of the provisions we put in the new proposed district plan that basically requires developers to assess if they're a high generating activity. And at that point, things like integrated transport assessments kick in, which actually gives us the information from the developers on the factors that we can actually then use to then generate the development contribution calculations. So that would be the main aspects from a traffic perspective. I think probably if I can, I might ask Murray or Mark to make any comments in regards to their specific development contribution aspects.
Yeah, so in terms of reserves, we've made some changes there, but not significant changes. One of the things that we have taken out of the policy was a credit that we had for it was for a tree and vegetation, which was a credit that we could give to developers. So we've taken it out basically because we never used it. So it's been redundant. So and mostly when we do an assessment of a new subdivision, we'll look at the vegetation in that, and normally we will get that in the reserve areas, and so that sort of supersedes any sort of credit that we might need to give. One of the key changes that we have made is we've introduced a community infrastructure development contribution this time round. So we haven't had that before. We've been able to under the LGA, but and most other councils do have a DC for community infrastructure, but we haven't had one. So this is one of the sort of key changes that we have made this time around. And that covers things like public toilets, our community centres, halls, indoor court spaces, cemeteries, and potentially aquatic facilities as well. We can also use it for playgrounds, but because most of those are on reserves, we haven't applied it to playgrounds because we can take a reserve contribution in those situations. We're introducing it, or the idea is to introduce it on a catchment basis. So that will be based around the reserve catchments that we have. And with those, we've actually, this time around, we've combined the was previously ward-based. So we had Selwyn Central, we had Ellesmere, we had Springs, and we had Melvin. So we've now combined what was previously the Selwyn Central and Springs into an Eastern Selwyn catchment. And we've and then we have a northwest catchment for the old Melvin area and a southwest catchment for the old Ellesmere area. And that's just to differentiate between where the expenditure is occurring, the capital expenditure occurring, and who's getting the benefit from it on a catchment basis. So we've used the same catchments for the community infrastructure DC that we've introduced as well. So yeah, and that's probably all I've got to say at this point.
Yep, sorry, so my summary is pretty briefer. There's been no significant changes to the three waters. So for water supplies, if you're connected to, for example, the Rolleston water supply, then you'll pay the Rolleston water supply DC. Likewise for wastewater, which is now the Selwyn Sewage Scheme, if you're connecting to that supply, you pay the required development contribution for that. And for stormwater, it's only a catchment in Lincoln, which covers those DC costs. So no significant changes for three waters.
Some of the other changes that have been made to the policy are around its administration and implementation. And I'll ask maybe Nada and Rachel if you'd like to talk to any of that. A brief summary.
Morning. So some of the changes that have been made around administering the policy, for us, it's been really hard to determine which policy applies for different applications for the same development. Like if it was a staged development or a comprehensive development, it's always been what comes first, the chicken or the egg, or the building consent or the resource consent. So we've made it quite clear in that space how we are to apply the policy. We've also done a little bit of a change to include the option to issue the co-compliance certificate where there are development contributions that are applicable before the development contribution has been paid. And we can put a charge against the title in that case. That limits council's liability for the building consents, the 10-year period there. We were having a lot of projects that would meet the end. Development contributions would be the only thing holding up the co-compliance certificate. This allows us to issue the co-compliance certificate but reduce some liability there for council. We've also got a trade waste discharge agreements. They're clearly defined in the policy, which can allow us to charge a top-up of development contributions if the demand is exceeded from what was originally assessed and charged. Yeah, I think that's probably about it for administering the charges. Yeah.
No, nothing else to add. Unless there's any questions.
I think because what I didn't catch at the start is that some of the policies you'll see we haven't provided marked up changes because some of them have actually gone through quite a significant overhaul, and this is one of them. So this is why we've tried to summarise those changes. But really now we'd like to open it up to any questions that councillors may have on this policy.
Sorry, just double checking, but we're going to put the policies into a document that the councillors could read and the old policy.
We have provided the current policy, the new policy, and a summary of changes with each one.
And where's the section that the councillors, just to draw their attention to make sure they know it's there?
Sorry. Oh, sorry, it was in the document emailed by Trace. Sorry. Is that hard work?
Great, thanks for the overview, Nicole.
So question around how Mark was talking about how they've differently grouped where the pots that the DCs go into now. And just a question, you guys have reinforced and all the way through that they need to be spent where they're earned. So to what level does it get to when you're talking about this Eastern Selwyn, so I suppose Rolleston, Lincoln, Prebbleton, is it then spent proportionally to that growth that's in that respective area, or how does it actually break down from that? And I'll let you answer that one because
Yeah, previously we had it on a ward basis, so the old wards. And this time round we decided to combine the former Springs and Selwyn Central wards into a single area. And that's mainly because of the a lot of the facilities that we're providing in the whole of the Eastern Selwyn area are used by people that move around that area. They're not necessarily used just by the so we looked at the sort of geographic areas as we're required to under the legislation to make sure that we get the catchments right. And when you think about some of the developments that we're potentially building in the future, a lot of those are designed, and some of the ones that have been built previously, to be used by people not necessarily just living in Rolleston or whatever. In terms of proportionality, that's based around our development program, which is based on the growth and where it's occurring. So our capital development program, depending on what the parks are, for instance, Kakaha Park, that was bought to service both Prebbleton and Lincoln, but it's also going to be used by people from wider in the district as well. So so that was a sort of rationale for moving in that direction, just because everything's getting a lot closer, people are moving around, and it just made sense to do that. And in terms of the actual capital expenditure, that's based on where the growth's occurring and is allocated in that way.
Transport's done on a similar basis, where we have the Greater Christchurch part of the district, which we define as the high growth area, and the transport DCs are collected at a higher rate in that area compared to the rest of the district. But we operate on the basis that all the upgrades are considered on a network basis and add to the network, and therefore that's the bucket of money that sits in that particular area that can be used for those roading projects.
cool. Thank you. My other question, because I'm quite worried about this, is the actual collecting of DCs, and it was mentioned. Sorry, I didn't catch what your name was. Who's sitting behind Rachel. So you're talking about a big subdivision, and then as they're selling the sections as they go, but they haven't paid for the DCs. So when are they paying for the DCs? Because you're registering against the title of each. Yeah.
No, that's only, so with subdivisions, we collect the development contribution before we issue the 224. So before they can apply for a title, sometimes there will be a development contribution that may be assessed under a resource consent and under a building consent. And it's more the comprehensives where they are building multiple dwellings on one allotment.
Okay,
yeah.
So that's where I was questioning about, because certainly I couldn't understand otherwise what you're talking about, how it was being applied.
And it's more so for the likes of where there is a family flat, so it's a standalone dwelling, or with an attached family flat, and the development contribution isn't paid under that building consent for much longer period after they've had their final inspection. That's where the charging or putting that charge on the title comes in.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. No, that's clarified it's answered my question perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm interested in this community infrastructure DC. I welcome it. I think it's well overdue. My question is, other councils have such a DC? This is something that is a normal practice in other places, no?
Yes, it is. So all of our surrounding councils have a community infrastructure DC. Christchurch City has one. I think it's about $1,000 across the city that is paid to developers, and that's worked out, based on the whatever projects that they have over that period. So yes, it's common practice. And we just, what we did previously, we sort of relied on the reserve contributions to help pay for some of our facilities, but it was only where they had an association with a reserve, and only for the bit that actually serviced the reserve. So for instance, the Selwyn Sports Centre, we did take development contributions for part of that, but that was only for the bit where the storage and the public toilets and change rooms that are used by the reserve, not for the facility itself. And similarly with the Taitapu, with the new community centre there, it was for the changing facilities, the contribution, and the bit that's directly associated with the reserve.
Thanks, Mark. I just, knowing these things can be an issue as long as it's defendable is all my worry is.
I guess question for Sharon. Is this policy going to make us better? Will the public be served better by this policy, and what's it going to cost us and our community?
I'm not sure I can answer all of that other than the context that we set, bringing all of these contributions about reducing ambiguity, making sure our processes are more refined, that it's easier understood so that our community, our developers or whatever, for any of the policies that we're providing today, it is really easy for them to read and understand about what is required within Selwyn District Council or how we will be applying our policies. So from that point of view, it's about being much more transparent, easier to read, etc. In terms of what it will cost council, can you just, what do you mean by in terms of that?
Well, I guess maybe it's the question is, at what point will we know how much it's going to cost? So, for example, like the DCs will cost our community things, but in terms of the changing from the old policy to the new policy, is it going to be a cost for us as council?
I'm actually going to look to Tim to respond to that.
If I understand the question, Phil, I think that there are some costs, but it's staff time mainly, and we have to do this anyway through the long-term plan process. So it's a requirement for us to have a look at our development contribution policy. As Sharon has said and the others have said, we'll try to make it clear and easier to read for the community. There is legal reviews, obviously, with the new community DC. We're going to making sure that that is defendable. Malcolm and PwC also doing a bit of review work. So there are some costs, but they're just part of what we do as a council, and every council across the countries.
But the policy isn't going to introduce, for example, another department or another massive work group, which is going to then, okay.
No.
That's great. Good. Thank you very much. That sounds like a great policy.
Thanks, Phil. Grant.
Some smaller questions and some larger ones. I suppose the taking away the vegetation credits, did you consider the NPS on Indigenous biodiversity when you took that out? I mean, are we required to have a credit factor for under that policy?
So any Indigenous vegetation that's found on this land is still protected under the district plan, so they can't just remove that out of right. It's largely other types of vegetation, exotic vegetation, which may have some value to the community, which we'll try factor into the reserves, as sort of Mark has said. It's a policy that's never been used in the past, but we do try to factor it into the design.
So a biodiversity credit will be covered somewhere else in the council. Okay. We get into that situation, it might more apply to existing landowners rather than development land.
Yeah, so we'd be investigating a future council plan change where there is significant vegetation on say a farm or whatever, and if the farmer does protect that, then we'd be looking at some sort of biodiversity credit to help offset that. Maybe it's a subdivision right, I'm not too sure. But
I was looking on page 22, the hue conversion factors. There's some columns there that say special assessment. Does special assessment mean that we've actually got a process where that's done, or is that kind of special assessment? How does special assessment work? Is there a methodology?
The mic has fallen to me.
You're shaking your head, Murray.
I think it's special assessment where we don't have sort of industry standards for what those flows would be. So one of the examples there would be supermarkets. So we'll talk to the foodstuffs or whatever the supermarket was and say, what sort of flows are you proposing to do? How big is your bakery, your meat processing, all those sort of things. And then we'd work out equivalent flows from actual flows. Sometimes we do an estimate at the time, and then we record flows post-development and then adjust those DCs following that. So it's where there's no standardised HUI that's across New Zealand that we can leverage off.
There has been a concern raised in the past that our commercial partners are perhaps not paying their fair share and actually flying under the radar and the amount of demand they're creating. And it just concerns me perhaps that we've got those. Were those Hugh equivalent factors reviewed in the policy so that they are still current and still relative?
Yeah, that was as one of the fundamental parts of the review of the policy is checking those HUI rates, and there was at least 6 to 7 reference sources that we used to cross-check, and also we did a bit of an analysis in regards to how it, for instance, stacked up against the Christchurch City Council policy to make sure that we're in step and not too out of step, if that makes sense.
It may be a bit naive of me, but I'll ask the question around some of the big concerns around our community, particularly on roading, is forestry and quarries. Could they be captured under the HUI capacity under here?
Yes, they definitely are captured, and in actual fact there was a specific section of work that went into just that very aspect, and we used the Royden quarry as an example to test our new policy to see how it stacked up, and on the basis of our current policy compared to our proposed policy, the DCs would lift. Not by an extraordinary amount, because that would be probably getting hard to defend, but they do lift, and they do represent being able to factor in the impact, particularly about heavy vehicles.
It's not on the table, forestry or quarries on non-residential. Is that captured somewhere else?
It probably is in the next table.
Next table, is it?
Yeah.
No. Pardon? Page 78. My apologies. Because one of the things I think Councillor Alexander, when he was here, was very keen on was trying to create a methodology, particularly over the weighbridge on quarries where we take a per tonne levy. Would that enable that?
No, it wouldn't enable that.
Okay, thank you. No, sorry, that's me.
I've got Shane, and then Deborah will come to you online.
Tēnā tātou, thank you very much, Sam. I'm just acknowledging all the work that's gone into it and the extra work as a result of. But just a few questions, or perhaps a summary on the catchment approach, alignment with future Selwyn, and also potentially the representation review. In particular, for community facilities. It's great. It's good to hear. But I'm guessing there's going to be some winners and losers in that, and it'll depend on the long-term plan priorities in terms of the community facilities and centres. So preemptively, I think it's well overdue, most certainly, and welcome it. Has a lift in DCs been considered, especially in the Three Waters space? Good to hear about the consents. I guess there's the lag there between consenting authorities and therefore the space in between to collect the DCs. So sorry, I've got a bit astray there. Has a lift been considered in DCs, the cost? And sorry, I've written a whole heap here. Cash in kind, I believe, for reserves, that's still part of the policy, no change there. Where's that allocated to? Yeah, basically that's my question, sorry.
Okay, well, I'll have a crack at answering, is there a lift? The way this works is that all the costs are entered into the financial model, and then it's divided by how many sections we have. So council can't necessarily go ahead and say with the idea of we're going to lift it, it is what it is. So it is just a simple calculation of the costs divided by the number of properties that are divided. So those calculations are still underway. So the policy is the framework, and then those costs will be loaded in once they're available.
Dependent on growth, so they will see a forecast lift in that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so every 3 years we review that capital program, and this time we've taken into account all the new plan changes that have gone in and what assets and investments we need to do to meet those extra demands, and that will be divided by the new total amount of population that will be generated from those plan changes and other areas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Deborah.
Thank you, and I hope you all got a summary of some of my questions that I sent out. Thanks, Matt, for clarifying why we were not collecting DCs for community facilities.
Deborah, I'll just get you to keep talking as if we could hear you, even though we can't, just so that when we can, we know that you're still speaking.
Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Nobody can hear me.
Deborah, we'll come back to you. We'll just try and figure out the system in here. We can see that the Zoom's working. It's just in the room. It's not coming through our system.
Great.
We'll move on to Lydia.
Thank you. My question is around primary production and specifically the rural production, and what do you consider as rural production and what triggers rural production DCs? And does that have any effect on existing farmers, I guess? And is it more around land use change? And then my second question is, are there any DCs that we could capture that aren't included in this to reduce burden on ratepayers?
I'll give that a bit of a go to answer. So the trigger for a development contribution, we can only collect it if there's a resource consent, building consent, certificate of acceptance, trade waste discharge, or a request for service connection. So with those rural productions, primarily it's only if they are applying for a building consent. And that may trigger a development contribution. Traditionally, we haven't charged like for hay barns in any sort of implement sheds. The only thing that we have charged for in the rural sector has been like milking sheds, because that's been the trigger, and obviously shows a clear demand that there are going to be milking tankers, etc., coming to the property. And in those circumstances, it would only be transportation contributions that would be applicable.
Does the when we talk about dairy sheds, does that include replacement of existing sheds?
No, so we only capture for anything additional. So if they were increasing the gross floor area, then that would be just that marginal increase that we would be charging for, because they would have that existing use credit.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Sophie.
I'm just wondering, as a thought, whether, Deborah, do you have your headset anywhere? Because quite often if you've got your headset, that microphone will work better than the one that's within the laptop. If that's, I'm not sure if you got it around nearby. Anyway, sorry.
To refer to email that came through, Sam, is that right, Deborah?
Can you hear me at all?
We've got a technology issue because the online stuff is all working. Her microphone's picking her up. The screen's showing that she's talking. We just can't hear it in the room. So there's something in the room that's happening.
In the worst case scenario, Deborah, have you got your cell phone with you?
Yes, I have.
If needs be, I will call you and I'll put my phone to the microphone so you can answer you can ask your questions.
Okay, thank you.
We have the technology somewhere. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. I mean, I can't imagine how much work's gone into this, so thank you very much. It looks like a lot of rewriting and a lot of thinking based on various testing situations over the last few years. So thank you very much for everything you put into it. Thank you for the explanations about the vegetation credits and the catchments. That totally makes sense. So don't need to ask about that. Also around the code of compliance and DCs, it's been quite interesting. Every so often you see somebody going, oh, everything's sorted apart from the code of compliance. And now I'm sitting there thinking, oh, is that simply that you just hadn't paid that last bit of money there? And you're making it sound like we're holding things up. So that's always good to know more. One question I had on page 64, it still refers to Eastern Selwyn sewage, and I get that there's probably a lot of editing still to go, but it's got various, it's got Darfield and Kerwea listed there, but then also in the lines below it, but also under Eastern Selwyn, it's got Doyleston, Leaston and Southbridge. I'm just wondering, like, so are they going to be being charged straight up? Because obviously those schemes aren't quite finished yet.
Good question. How are they going to be sorted?
It will just be the one line. So if you're connected to the, it will just be the Selwyn sewage scheme, then you pay that DC. So there's some edits to be made there.
Fair enough. And that will apply to the newer or the townships that are coming online in the near future as well?
Correct. Yeah. So new developments will pay that DC. We haven't got the connection of existing ratepayers in the long-term plan, so it's another discussion. In the first 3 years, they'll be in year 4 onwards, and at which point a special rate will be made for them. So it'll be the DC plus the cost to extend the wastewater to their individual properties.
Cool. Thank you. I have a question regarding page 59. Now, I know this has been around for a while and I've never quite understood it. There's a section that mentions non-residential development, which includes commercial and worker accommodation. I can kind of understand around just trying to.
Great. Now I've lost everybody. Now I've lost everybody. Hello?
Just wanted to check, are you able to hear anything?
Sorry, I've lost everything. I've got no sound for the for
We'll save it up. But it was more, I couldn't figure out reading through here how would DCs be applied to, say, if somebody wanted to knock down existing buildings on a few larger sections, say in Rolleston around here, and then build, a 3-story apartment block or something like that. So how would DCs be applied in that sort of case, please?
So when we undertake a development contribution assessment, we have a look at the activity that's already on site at the moment and apply the credits. So if you had 3 underlying titles, you would generally have 3 underlying credits for the roading and reserve contributions, and potentially water and wastewater if they were connected into those catchments. And if they were, building 6 units across those 3 titles, then the additional demand that we would be charging for is the additional 3 dwellings.
So would that also apply to so for instance, if that happened on quite a large scale, just section by section, or a collection of sections by sections, and eventually you needed to do a bigger upgrade, just because obviously more toilets flushing, it's not just the upgrade underneath that section, then eventually it becomes the upgrade underneath the entire road, and that sort of thing. So that's all factored in as well?
What's that? No, I've unmuted it. That should be unmuted.
Yes, so when we're looking at growth, we have for water services, the 3 waters, we have hydraulic models which calculate the size of pipes required to meet the development in its total form, and so all those proportional costs are then allocated through to that. There may be specific development agreements required to upgrade certain aspects, so there's a limited amount in the local catchment, but generally speaking it's covered under the whole DC, unless there is specific matters that need to be covered, and that's under a development agreement.
Thank you very much.
Again.
Thank you, Deborah. Have we got it working?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, yeah, Deborah, don't worry. We've still got another couple of speakers here, and we'll come back to you, and we'll get you on the phone if we can't otherwise. Grant?
One's just quite low level. It's about ward maps. I don't know how important they are. The application of the ward maps are in here are wrong against current ward maps, and the representation review might charge them again further, I suppose. So it's just I don't know if Springs Ward 1's wrong anyway. So I assume that means by dint of comparison that Ellesmere must be wrong because there's a change in the maps as well. But I think it was important what Sophie was bringing up, and I wanted to speak to that too. Around MDRS application, and I think I've mentioned with you before, Murray. Do we on day one build the infrastructure to handle MDRS provisions? Or as Sophie suggests, we could be left with a hang of a liability with undersized kit. And I know you try and as best you can provide for diversity, but if MDRS applies to that zone, shouldn't we be building the infrastructure to cope with MDRS on that whole area?
Okay, I'll try that.
Smiling awkwardly. It's a difficult one to answer. So when you look at the larger catchment, it's quite easy. So we can work out, you're going to need a large pump station at the bottom of a catchment for wastewater, for example. The further up you move into the catchment, it gets a bit more tricky. So at the top end of it, generally speaking, we've got a minimum pipe size of 150 for sewer. And so there's actually a lot of capacity in that pipe. That's a minimum size and it's often oversized. So there's capacity there. So it's that halfway down the catchment, which is where we have the problem. So the bottom, we can design the large pump stations to cope for the whole development. Easy. The top part is generally okay. It's that bit in the middle. So in the long-term plan budgets, we've given an allocation for upgrades. The problem we have is we just don't know who's going to develop, when they're going to develop in terms of that higher density. So it's the time frames are hard to meet. We do need some flexibility to move budgets backwards and forwards. But we have got an allocation for oversizing those pipes in that middle part of the catchment. So we've done the best we can, but we need to see how that development happens over time.
Magical answer, but using Springston Ralston roads as an example, we've had incremental development, which means basically the whole road's been developed and the road's knackered and everyone's going, well, where's the money to pay for the new road? And it's not there, is it? And so you've got a complete new development with the wider Selwyn ratepayer and having to pick up the cost of creating a main thoroughfare.
Just to add to the MDRS, so under the new government, it's potentially becoming optional if we have sufficient amount of capacity within our space, which I think we will, but we have to wait for the details on that. So what that may mean for us is that we potentially would do a council plan change to retract those medium density areas to actually targeted areas where we actually do want it, which will be identified through our future cell and spatial planning work.
That's fine.
Sam, it does speak to that, back to that equation around DCs also, and I didn't really get to talk about infrastructure in terms of the transport, and case in point would be Mance Road and Leaston now, where the original development is basically a car width and a half apart. So when someone parks on the other side, they're waiting now to get through. With the development over the back that will have linkage, there'll be increased traffic flows. So it's already at capacity, the road is, and it's chipping away at the edges, and there's drains either side of it. But, it just was going back to that potential for lift within the equation is considering future development.
I think a key aspect that you've got to think about is that we can only apply development contributions to actual capital projects that we've identified that we want to do, and only to the growth component of those projects. So, for instance, from a transport perspective, we've developed our CapEx program for the new LTP. We've identified all the projects that we think need to happen, and through modelling and other magic stuff, we've identified what the proportion of those projects relate to growth, and that's what the DC is applied to. So we can't necessarily say, we're collecting all these DCs, let's do something with Mance Road, unless we've actually specifically identified Mance Road as being part of that DC aspect and requirement in terms of a CapEx project relating to that.
I guess then that goes back to future Selwyn, and is it aligned?
We're going to move to Deborah.
Yeah, Deborah, you might just have to mute yourself because we will be able to hear the echo. Okay, I'll put you on to speaker now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm having to read.
Deborah, we can obviously hear you twice because yeah, we've got your range of questions in front of us that you sent and circulated.
Look, I'll move away from the computer. Is this helpful?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I did actually take some time to read all the documents and put some questions down. There were only some questions. I guess thank you, councillors, for those who have brought up issues around my questioning. But I just wonder, given that this is an LTP process, is there an opportunity to introduce new policies? And I've mentioned about the land drainage. We do collect, I understand, some DCs from our existing consenting processes, but not a lot. And I'm just wondering when whether this can actually be expanded, because quite often the land drainage system downstream from Lincoln is actually the secondary overflow pathway, and that was never ever designed to accommodate. It is the stormwater being designed in Lincoln and as a secondary pathway. As a consequence, the downstream culverts that have been in over 100 years are often too small, and due to sediment buildup, the gradient needs to be altered in those drains to actually accommodate the flow. Now, that's all accommodation of growth. The argument you will get back is, oh, but everybody deals with their own stormwater retention within their own subdivisions. That's fine. But at a time of flood, these are designed to overflow into the downstream land drainage system. And I think that that's a consequence of growth that needs to be considered on more of a holistic base, instead of everybody in a lolly scramble and saying, oh, well, you know, the council will deal with that. I've walked away. I've said that I'm dealing with it all on my property or in my subdivision, when the reality is the secondary flow path doesn't do that. The same with our roading. In Lincoln, many of the secondary flow paths for the stormwater retention basins are our roads. Are we collecting a DC under the roading aspect for that stormwater, that secondary flow path? So I want clarification on those issues, please.
Right.
Good morning, Deborah. Thank you for your question. I think you've sort of answered it as well, although I know you don't like the answer you've given. So it is true to say that all new developments need to attenuate the flows so that the post-development flow is no greater than the pre-development flow up to a 100-year event. Above the 100-year event, then there is overland flow paths that will go through to the rural areas. We'd have to take advice if we could have set up a DC to cover those things, but those are extreme rainfall events. So historically, we were under the understanding that no, we can't collect DCs for that because the effects are mitigated on the individual sites.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that answer, but I think it needs to be investigated. Given climate change and the impact of what's actually going to happen on infrastructure that has not been upgraded for over 100 years. So I just wanted to highlight that question. The other is the maps, and I've quoted that. They don't, I think a better fit would be aligning them with the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy location, which is our high impact area for community facilities, which means that Burnham and Upper and Selwyn Huts would move into that high impact zone. I just think it makes it clearer, given that we actually do have structure plans for outside the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy zone or area. So that's why I brought that up, because I just think it'd be a cleaner fit. And thanks for those councillors that that asked that question. The other issue is that I think some discussion, and you've partly clarified it, is around the DCs that are being collected in the Garfield Curwee area. So as I understand it, the township would be looked at as an outline development plan similar to a subdivision, and they would pay 5,000 approximately per connection, and then the new development will pay 6. But then they've also got to pay the pipeline costs on top of that. Now, is that for both the new development and the old development in that location?
Hi, Deborah, it's Murray here again. So just to clarify, all townships that are connected to the cell and sewage scheme will pay the same DC, and that is still being calculated. So at the moment, new developments in Darfield, Curwee are paying that DC now. So they've been charged the cell and sewage scheme DC. For existing properties in Darfield, council or the LTP is proposing that they are connected from the 4th year in this coming LTP. And so the cost of them haven't been determined, but they'll be paying the DC for cell and sewage scheme plus the cost to actually connect them into that scheme.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that, and there are going to be interest charges, etc., as externalities charged on those DCs, so they're not set blank standard as they look in the LTP.
Yep, that's all part of the financial model for those DCs, correct?
Okay, and while we're taking the vegetation one out for urban, I understand that in our rating remission policy, we actually have credits available for land areas containing or keeping biodiversity. Is that correct?
Pam has confirmed that is the case.
Sorry?
Pam is in the room and she has confirmed that yes, that is the case.
Okay. That's basically it. Are there any, just one other, are there any new policies that we, apart from the land drainage investigation, one, and the that could be liable for collection of a DC that other councils have picked up on and we haven't?
Jen, Jody.
That's not something that's been identified during the review process.
Thank you. Deborah, did you have anything else, Deborah?
You maybe didn't hear that answer, Deborah. That's not something that's been identified through the process.
It has. Okay. No, that's fine. I guess that brings me up to date, but I really think that those, I'd like some answers in writing to my questions if that's helpful, with especially around the maps, if you look at the maps and what's best for fit, given the other structure plans for Melbourne and for Ellesmere.
Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. I'll put you on to mute now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks for persevering through the technology issues. Sharon, do you have more? That's just great. We'll move on to the next policy that sits in the agenda for today.
Thank you very much. We're going to, oh, my screen has stopped. Okay, we're going to move on to the significance and engagement policy, and I'm going to ask Jody to take you through that one for us.
The significance and engagement policy is another policy that's gone through a very substantial rewrite, and to help explain those changes and those rewrites, I'd like to invite Maria to come and talk to those.
Ata Maria koutou kotai mai nei tēnei wā, kone hira o wai kirikiri o ngā mana o te whenua no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So I suppose with our long-term plan and what that looks like currently, And just taking you back really quickly, as a snapshot, it had statements. It was very precise, but didn't have how we were going to do that in the kaupapa. So with the significant and engagement policy, we looked at that in terms of the teams and how that was going to look for future. So utilising te rautaki, te kakaroa, as well as looking at all the other forms of documents in terms of the Local Government Act, Te Runga o Ngaitahu Act, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, all of these documents that we looked at and influencing this, making sure that it's not so clinical and looking at it so that anyone could pick up the document, read it and understand where they could go to or what they wanted to do within our communities.
Thanks, Marea. I'll elaborate a little bit more on the specific changes to the policy. So we had a loss of the subject matter expert in the space. There was a senior communications advisor on this, and they left. And so the review they left quite early on in the process. And so the review's been picked up by myself. And so I'll try and answer as many questions as I can on this, but I'm also not necessarily the subject matter expert in this space either. The feedback that we did receive and work through with the subject matter expert before the departure was that the current policy was not really very clearly understood across the organisation, and that clearer guidance really was needed to help people interpret and apply the policy in a consistent way and understand what the policy meant. The policy content itself is highly legislated within the Local Government Act. It sets up very specific content requirements, but we needed to balance those against readability, clarity and consistency to help people apply policy. We reviewed several policies in the local government sector and ultimately decided to follow a similar approach from two local councils from the South Island. Just in terms of structure design and also assessment criteria, which is a significant change to the policy itself, to help address the feedback that we'd received from the organisation around clarity and consistency. Next slide, please, Jen. Yeah, this slide that you see behind you is essentially a summary of the key pieces of content that have been revised throughout that process. And so what has happened is we've gone to a more consolidated and clear set of assessment criteria. We've also introduced a 3-step process into working through significance engagement. And we've done a lot of work around making sure that the policy is easy to understand and apply and implement and read in terms of structure and design. Any questions?
I just have one, and it's around whether there should be a separate Māori consideration. So we've got the importance to Selwyn District. What are our obligations under the Acts that we have to consider broader implications for Māori beyond Mana Whenua?
So one of the things that we're looking at doing throughout all of the teams within Waikirikiri is influencing and through and weaving, I'm going to say a whāriki, a mat, and how that looks. And so that's where Te Paumā Taho has come in using their skill base, our skill base, and influencing what that looks like. And probably throughout many documents, you'll start to see that being influenced. So it's not just in one particular area, it's throughout the whole document.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Council strategic assets, the definitions in there, do you see them as constraining to the council? I'm just particularly thinking about built recreational facilities, halls and such like, which we might want to, through demand or otherwise, either improve or put into mothballs. Is that constraining to us, or is that actually enabling?
Yeah, I think as I understand it, the strategic assets are referred to collectively, so it's the whole network. So I don't think it's constraining in terms of any of the potential proposals we might have in the future.
Just using an example, how we transferred ownership of the Horowrata Hall to a local group. I mean, under this policy, should it have gone through a public notification or different, we did go through a pretty exhaustive process, but would it, under this scenario, be okay?
No, I think we've had some legal advice on this previously, and I think it is, if it's a significant matter, then maybe if you're disposing of a large number of your hall facilities or whatever it is, then you would need to go through that process. But just transferring ownership to another entity, I don't think would trigger that policy at this stage.
It may or may not trouble us, but Cord used to be on there. It's no longer on there.
What policy?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a point that Deborah has raised as well. And we have noted that, and it may have been an omission on our part.
I think the last time we discussed it, it was deliberately taken.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to think of a meeting that Dunn's handled. Yeah, where that was spoken about. Yeah.
So are we to take it that you're happy that you don't want to reverse that decision?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Shane.
Oh, thanks, Sam. Inga mana, inga reo, e rau rangatira, mana whenua, mātauranga, te rautaki ki kakarua, te paumataho, titiru ana policy, ngā mihi mana. And it was a bit of a kōrero that Sam was had spoken about under Section 81 of the Local Government Act to ensure that councils, regulatory authorities allow for decision-making processes for all Māori. And I've been harping on about it since I got here to ensure that it's a wider view for everyone to be participating in. And I'm very confident now that through the collaboration and partnership that the weaving together of that whāriki will happen through other strategies, ensuring that this the Papatipu policy in place allows for all Māori to be engaged. So I'm very appreciative of the mahi that's been put into this, and also to this council, the inclusivity and partnership of our Papatipu, our Runaka. Ngā mihi mana. Kia ora. Well, I'll just secondly to Grant's question, and I haven't found it in here. Are you saying that consideration? Are we considering consideration of disposal of potential assets should also be reflected in this policy for consideration of mana whenua? Is that what we were just alluding to there? Or oh, sorry.
I think
is
what
that
we were
a
saying is
consideration that should be in this policy, perhaps?
Just to clarify the initial consideration, Grant, of what you were suggesting was that assets that are held as investments shouldn't be listed here because they need the flexibility to be able to be considered for trade at any point in time.
Yeah, I got there towards the end, but then I thought, oh, that's maybe within this policy process that needs to be considered as well. So just food for thought. Good night, Wait.
Thanks, Shane. Sophie?
Yeah, just a quick one from me. Thank you very much for including climate change. I mean, it's a massive thing, and sometimes the conversation isn't had because if it's not in the tick box list, then you don't have as good a conversation, and it absolutely needs to be there. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next one.
The next policy that we have is the Māori contribution to council decision-making policy. So this is an existing policy that we already have. It was introduced to my understanding, into the last LTP, and it's undergone a substantial rewrite for this LTP. And I'll defer to Maraea to talk through the collaboration that's occurred on that.
Kia ora. So I think we want to talk about too, like Jody said, our current policy wasn't really fit for purpose. And so what we wanted to do is we had the what, and where, but we didn't have the how we were going to accomplish this and the way forward. So we utilised this documentation, and you will have it in its entirety, of influencing different mechanisms within council, within acts, to start to weave. So for the strategy, for the engagement and significant policy, that is the end result. But for Pacific policies, we're starting to weave them through.
So building on that again, the current policy is very descriptive. It describes current agreements, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of underpinning principles. So what we decided to do with this policy is to make it a principles-based policy. So it is something that is more future-looking rather than just describing what is currently in place. And this does sort of reflect the requirements of the Local Government Act, where we do have to contain a piece of content in the LTP, which talks around how we actually are. And I think Councillor Shane has already mentioned the legislative requirements in Section 81. So this policy will help frame the content that will go into the LTP around Section 81.
And probably adding on from that too, the policy also notes the special relationships that Council or Waikirikiri has with significant stakeholders within our community.
Thank you very much. We welcome any questions.
Yeah, Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. Tēnā koe. Thank you. It also, just to add on to the special relationships, also reflects the special relationship of Māori freehold land as well, and the multiple ownership. So it's good to see that reflected, because it's just been a one-word title type of thing, but it's actually deeper and more meaningful than that. I'm presuming that it's a positive effect. The changes to the policy, I do see a lump sum deduction of $7,000 for all Māori freehold land to reflect the administrative costs. Fair? Is it a fair?
I think you might be referring to different policies.
Oh, I am, sorry. Remission of rates. My apologies. Yep, I've skipped it here. No.
Great. No other questions on this policy. Thank you. We'll move on to the next one. Oh, Sharon?
Yeah, Deborah wants a
I'll get
question.
Deborah.
Yeah, I'm just going to call her now.
Sharon's just calling you, Deborah.
We'll be doing a full test at 12 noon.
Sort of lunchtime. Thank you.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Thank you. Look, I noticed that we have a reference to Waihora, Watara, the narrative, okay, for the building. And I brought this up in comparison with the annual report. It assumes that the building, I guess, is going to be built in one way or another, if it's going to be included in our long-term plan under a policy. I just want to highlight that I couldn't find, while I don't have a problem with the building, I do seem to have a problem with the inclusion of the development of the grounds at of the reserve grounds at 9 million that seem to be tied up in this project, because we haven't decided on that yet, and it's going through the LTP process. If someone can prove me wrong and find it for me, the 9 million that we've already approved it for the development of the reserve.
Deborah, I'm not. Thanks, Deborah, for the question. I'm just not sure that's part of this policy.
So, Deborah, we're talking about the Māori contribution to council decision-making policy. Are you talking about a different policy?
No, I'm talking about Waihora, Whatarau, which I understand is the community building.
Yeah.
For Leicester.
Okay, Jodie's going to provide a response.
So the reference to that in the slide is more around utilising the narrative around the whātaro. So there were some aspects of the narrative that we weaved into the approach taken to this policy. So it's nothing about, it doesn't have anything to do with the building. It's more about how we utilise existing documentation to make sure that, as Maria was mentioning, we weaved a lot of existing documentation that we have that reflects our partnership into this document.
Yeah, so there is no commitment in terms of into the long-term plan, Deborah. It's been used as an example.
Okay, so it's the gifting of the name that and the narrative around gifting of names. Maybe that would be a clearer heading.
Thank you, and noted.
Thank you.
I think just to clarify that too, Deborah, is that we utilise different documents that council actually have at this present time. And it was about utilising the information that was in those documents and weaving them through the policy.
Okay, I just think if it involves other than just a single project, then it probably needs to be reworded for clarification around the gifting of names for all of our facilities.
Yes, thank you, and noted.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Any further questions on this policy? No, we'll move on to the next one. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Alison to talk us through the proposed changes to our financial policies.
Good morning. I think we'll start with the Treasury Management Policy and just note that this isn't a policy that actually goes into the long-term plan, but there is a heavy linkage there. This is on the agenda for this afternoon's Finance and Performance Committee, so I don't know how much we want to go into this just now. I mean, clearly the linkage is on the flexibility we have for debt funding if that is required. So if we're happy to discuss this at the Finance and Performance Committee, I will leave that one for now. Thank you. The next one.
To just answer that, depending on time, we've made our way through a number of policies now, and if there's the opportunity with us all here and that on the agenda now, we could cover it off rather than having to repeat it later.
Okay.
Sam, I'd prefer to talk about this afternoon because I'm going to be meeting with some people, some staff today to discuss a few questions. So I'd just rather have my head around things.
Okay. Cool. We can carry on then as you planned.
Thanks. So the next one, the Revenue and Finance and Policy, and just noting this is still in draft just now. There is still work that needs to be done in here, and we are still working through the financials, which will go to inform some of the narrative changes that goes into this policy. The key one being what we may or may not land on as far as a rates uplift would look like. And also any additional revenue streams that we're working through would also be captured within this as well. So I don't have a draft one that I've sent out yet for that very reason. So I'll take any questions on that just now. If not, happy to move on to the next one.
We're just calling Deborah, who has a question.
Okay.
Deborah, if you move away from your computer again, thanks.
Thank you. I'm pleased this is in draft form because I had some questions around different rating structures that we actually have that aren't district-wide rating structures that I couldn't find in the documents. And it did refer me to another document, but I couldn't find it in that either. And it's around how we actually have some of our targeted rates, and I mentioned drainage as just an example, how we collect them from the various land parcels throughout our district. All it mentioned was that the ratepayers will contribute some small amount, but it's important for the landowners to understand what they're contributing in rates. And that was just one example that I pulled out. But I'm pleased that this is in draft form and more work will be done on this and it will come back to us.
Thanks, Deborah.
Am
And
I on the right track with regards to my understanding of the more work that needs to be done?
absolutely, and that's the very reason why it's still in draft form just now.
Okay.
Or one of the reasons it's still in draft.
We'll see through some more issues probably around this particular area.
Thank you, Deborah.
Carry on.
So the next one is the rates postponement, and hopefully this will be an easy one because we have put no changes. So it's status quo to where we are just now. So I will take any questions if anyone has any comments that they would like to add to that.
There appear to be none, Alison.
Excellent. The next one is the rates remission policy, and I do have Pam and Aksha here as well. So we have suggested a few changes in the policy in its draft form just now. I'm not going to read through every single bullet point as is on screen. But what I'd like to do is just see if anyone has any questions, and just noting when it comes to the second dwelling and where we have had proposed plan changes, this is creating a fair amount of traffic into council around, from a ratepayer standpoint, how they feel about this. So I think it's quite important, if we can, to include this within the revised policy.
Any thoughts from councillors? Grant?
Sorry, could you just repeat that again and why it's important to be included in this policy? I just didn't understand that.
So if I go to the second dwelling one just now, so we've got, it's quite a loose narrative just now that it almost is a little bit of a trust basis. So where we've got a second dwelling that may be a self-contained unit, if there is, say, a family member, like call it a granny flat for want of a better choice of words, we would not charge on that basis. But if it's rented out as a separate, say, Airbnb, then we would. So I think I'll defer to Pam here if Pam wants to add anything else on that.
While Pam's coming, I can talk to it because I did want to speak about this. And the last time we brought it up, we definitely batted it to the manager of enabling services discretion because it was such a difficult issue. And I think, Nicole, you were on.
Yeah, it was you, me, Murray.
Yeah, we had a working party committee to try and make this workable. But once you started getting into the realities of it, what's the definition of a family?
It's a fair question.
And a traditional Anglo-Saxon versus Pacific versus Indian versus whatever you might call it, it became extremely difficult for the person who and the staff who's going to have to administer this. And while I applaud you putting it in here, I feel sorry for the person who's going to be administering it because it's very, very difficult.
I think it's fleshing out the detail a little bit more. So how it's worded just now, it's open for interpretation. So I would like to change the wording just to clarify what we are trying to achieve. And you're absolutely right. We do have to police this in a way, and it would become very difficult, to your point around all the different, what we're classing as a family units. But we do need to try and make sure that this isn't a property that's, say, an Airbnb or someone else is renting it. And that's where we're trying to just change the narrative.
Yep. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
One of the challenges we found is that no matter whether they were family or not, if they weren't living in that family situation, they would be paying the hues or through their rent or through their mortgage payment or through their rest home payments. So it wasn't really equitable not to charge it in some respects, but I'll leave that with you.
Any other questions on that one? No. And just talk briefly to one of the other changes. So we've had a few examples where we've had QV do evaluations, and that's based on a proposed plan that was intended to go ahead. Obviously, individuals are then paying potentially inflated rates on what the QV valuation uplift is. I think historically, most of the proposed plan changes have gone ahead. We've had one example recently where it's not, and quite rightly so. The ratepayers have come back to Pam and her team and talked to, does this mean we're looking at a rates remission in this space? But this is not documented in the policy just now. And that's one thing we would like to include.
Would this capture and I think we discussed this about 3 weeks ago, instances where landowners have a rating rise when they haven't actively sought rezoning of their land. I think there was an example where a landowner, a third party undertook a rezoning exercise which included their land, and through no fault of their own, they ended up with quite a high valued property which would pay rates on. Is this going to capture that?
I'm going to hand that one to Pam to answer.
No, particularly. I would like to say that we will include this in our review. I'm aware that that has happened, and due to some of our policies and procedures, some of the properties wouldn't be able to go ahead and be subdivided or developed further. So at this point in time, we will include it in our review.
As part of that discussion, I think it was the general consensus I heard around the table was that we didn't think it was right or equitable that a rezoning should proceed without the landowner at least being aware that it was underway.
Yep.
I don't know how we manage that within our notification processes, but is that something that we can endeavour to do within our team?
It would be a wider discussion with the building team and Rob's team with regards to what was on the table. Yes, I agree that we will look into that and see what we can do to make that more transparent.
And some of the discussion on that wasn't even that their land was rezoned, it was that the land across the road was rezoned, and could possibly be rezoned, so their lifted value was put through the roof just because of potential, not based on anything that was realised at the time.
The comment I will make though is we are very reliant, Quotable Value do our revaluations as an independent valuer, and so they will factor in whatever they're aware of at the time when they do those values. We need to make sure our policies allow us to work with what is appropriate for the district.
Shane.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much for the work that's gone on. Thank you for sending through the track changes. Appreciate that. The remission policy for Māori freehold land, section 94.2. So just clarification that currently, or is this additional to a person actually using the land or a person actually using a rating unit, means a person who alone, will need to pay a rate. So that currently exists, or it's a track change that isn't in there at the moment. So that rating currently exists for those that use Māori freehold land for the purposes of what is stated in here.
Yeah, they still pay the rates on those properties.
Yep.
Sorry, they still pay the rates on those properties as of now.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's good to have the track changes in there and clarification and for information. So it's good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Sophie.
Yeah, I just wanted to support as well that thing about plan changes, changing the value of places. But at the same time, I have in the past had some queries as well from people who have bought a house maybe 50 years ago, and obviously the wider town change means that the uplift is gone. That's a lot harder to deal with. But when it's obviously a bit of a step change, a plan change is something quite different. A building across that, because suddenly you've got, you live close to the new town centre. I'm not sure it's the sort of thing that would apply there, but I'm wondering whether that would bring those sorts of conversations into light as well. That would be a lot more complicated. So
I agree with you, Sophie, and that's where it comes back to with Quotable Values doing our values for us.
Yeah.
They will look at what's happening in the district, and I'm aware of a situation quite close to Rolleston here where a situation like that has occurred.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it and come back on it, but we are restricted by Quotable Values guidelines and what they do for us as our independent valuers, and then we need to look at what our policies are to be able to manage that.
Yeah, cool. And I did have another question, and I apologise if I'm out of order. It's been quite awkward because our agenda basically has a single document with no bookmarks between the different policies. So I've been trying to create them as I go, and occasionally realise that I've missed one. But on 294 of our agenda, so that's 5.5.2 property investments in the Treasury Management Policy, there is a line that mentions community boards and committees. And I just thought I'd better mention that because we don't actually have community committees anymore. So there may be a particular organisation that is being thought of with that line, or perhaps it needs to be reworded.
Can I come back to you on that one? Thanks.
Thanks, Alison. Next one.
The lump sum policy, it's noted there, no changes required. Actually, there probably is a change because I think this policy does stem back to COVID, where we were allowing people to pay rates in full. Pam, is that correct? And I think, Jen, you were going to remove that one. So what we're proposing here is to remove that policy, and any key narrative that sits within it would then move into the appropriate, whether it be rates policy or revenue and finance policy, because it's doubling up a little bit in the information that we've got. And was there any questions on the last one, on the rating of the Maori freehold land?
Shane, you had a question.
You-
Thank you. Thank you for the work also and the explanation that you're making. It's valuable for everybody, I believe.
Cool. Thanks, Alison. And Pam, team. Jen and Jody, back to you.
Thank you very much. That actually concludes our LTP related policy section. Just a big thank you to all the team coming to support the presentation today and all the work that's gone into the policies. And if we're ready to go, yeah, thank you.
I'm just wondering how we schedule a break in with the rest of the presentation that you've got for us, or whether we just push on and work through it.
I suspect that there's probably time for a break if you would like one now.
You want to do that and then we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Yeah, 10-minute
10
break,
minutes.
and we'll come back. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Why aren't we on Teams?
That's okay, that's my fault.
Yeah, but I want to know if we can hear Deborah.
Right, can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yep, got you.
Oh, thank goodness for that. I just sent you another text too with some other questions that I actually had, but they were all runs that I sent through to you last night anyway, so. Finally.
To phase two of this session today, which is we're going to relook at the community outcomes. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for such a productive session that we had on the 8th of November. What we've done since then, we've been focusing on a number of refinements to the community outcomes. So one is integrating the feedback that you provided at the workshop on the 8th of November. Also, we've been looking at better reflecting the matters that are important, of importance to mana whenua, and incorporate a bit of te reo into the outcomes as well. There's been development of a framework that sort of articulates council's role. So if I remember correctly from our conversation last time, that's where a lot of the questions were coming, is that, yes, we understand this, but what is our role in achieving those outcomes? So we've done some work around that to socialise with you. And we've also just done a bit of administrative tidying, just to remove words or verbs that don't clearly reflect council's role, just to tidy it up a wee bit more. So that's what we've been doing since we last spoke with you. And we've got Ben here who's going to take us through the changes that we've been making. So Ben, over to you.
Yeah, it's just that was as much excitement as you're going to get. This is the archetypes that we had in our workshop, where Future Selling workshop that Anne ran for us. And this helps kind of just separate out those different bits that we do. And then what we've done is we've tried to apply these to the outcomes, just so you can see this is the outcome we're trying to achieve, but this is the role we're going to play in that element as a council. So you got the community outcome and a council's role in there. So what we'll do is we'll just go through each of the outcomes, some of the changes we've made, and then the roles we've identified alongside each of the outcomes. So yeah, in the environmental one, what we've done is we've just clarified this element around the air and the water role. We've changed the wording around the productive land bit, and hopefully the feasibility of those other bits are tidied up in there and added a lot more to that and reflection of Te Ao Māori as well, bringing those two bits together. So in the following slide, we have the revised outcomes. That's looking cool. And we don't need to stay on this, so.
Hopefully these were I know it was a very long document, but at the end of the pre-reading that was circulated late last week. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to have a look at these, but if there's anything specific you'd like us to run through, please let us know.
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully the wording here is working well. So the key bit we can look at here is what council's role is within this. So in the environmental space, we are a strong community leader, articulating a vision around what we want to see the environment to be, and also a strong shaper, which is providing the regulations in our plans and to provide direction on that as well. So there's also the infrastructure that we provide to support achieving those goals, and there's all the other elements there too. So when we're talking about the living within our air, soil, water limits, we've got the advocacy there because that reflects the role that we play in the air quality space, where we're not the regulators or the shapers of that or providing infrastructure, but we're hoping to still advocate on behalf of our community for that. Though, but when we're talking about soil and biodiversity, we are part of setting that direction in our strategy. We're putting rules in our district plan, and we're providing services through our SNF funding and stuff like that to meet that. So that hopefully the ticks there start to show the bits that we're doing within those outcomes and flow through. Do we want to reflect on each of these as we go, or I'll just ramble through? All right, let's get going.
I'll just go one question, Ben, on that. Yeah, thank you, Sam. And Te Waihora Ellesmere being restored under infrastructure, I think, and I've mentioned it before, the Ellesmere wastewater pipeline would be a perfect example. So Ellesmere, that pipeline would be a perfect example of infrastructure playing its part in the environmental protection and kaitiaki space. So I think we can really put a tick there. I think, in collaboration with Mana Whenua, I think is the most important key part to it. And just thinking outside here, opening up the whenua to lay a pipe to be good kaitiaki and protecting Te Waihora, perhaps there's a significance and a collaborative approach that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah, and so hopefully the integrator role is the one where we're trying to bring people together to achieve those things as well. So yeah, that's theirs too. But yeah, we can add that infrastructure stuff too.
Right.
So the economic one, we've clarified a few things around you got them around right. Employment, and then kind of shifting the focus out of just mentioning rural at this top, but more focus on the broad diverse economy and bringing the rural bit through at a lower level. So hopefully the new outcomes are more reflective of that. And if we looked,
quick look at those.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. And we go to
yeah. So when thinking about council's role in the economic space, it's different to the environmental space. So what we've got here is a lot more advocacy and promotion. There's little bits of integrating, shaping, and providing the infrastructure. And also the work that's going on in the economic strategy as well will help probably clarify and bring some more elements through here. But we'll just work on what we know we can rely on now and bring that through there. So so we're more of promoting an advocacy role inside this economic space. We do some regulation stuff as well. So hope start to see the different role we have in these outcomes. I don't know if there's
Any questions on the economic stuff people want to raise? No, thanks, Ben.
Bang up job. Yeah, so not heap of changes here on the economic one. Just clarified some wording and brought through some more of the bicultural element in there. So there's a fair bit of outcomes in here as well. Yeah, so there is that bicultural one we've added, talking around making sure people have access to increase that competency through the learning opportunities that we have as well, that we offer. So yeah, the role that council plays in this, again, starts to look a bit different. We have services that we offer through the libraries. We've got regulations on some of those elements, but also provide the facilities, but then we also do a lot of integrated, bringing the groups together, bringing the central government groups and public services groups, and also advocating for our community back up there as well. So yeah, there it is. A lot of ticks. Sweet.
Any questions on this one?
I just had one question going back one slide, sorry, and it was around our role in economic outcomes. District is a key regional freight logistics hub supported by an efficient freight network, and then we've got a tick here in the infrastructure provider. Specifically, what do you see is
that would just be the
roading,
the network, yeah, and making sure that we're clarifying or setting up the hierarchy of roads to meet those needs. Yeah,
got my tick, Ben. Thank you.
Big tick on. And yeah, the last ones are the cultural outcomes. So we've just added more stuff in there. Definitely more on the Mana Whenua partnerships, multicultural elements, bringing through those Mana Whenua elements as well. So there's some new outcomes. No, I don't know. Here are the revised outcomes.
So just to follow on from that too with Ben is what we did is we've got a bicultural glossary that was the influence of the te reo in the documents, also along with te reo taki, te kakarua, in terms of the po and influencing that, because we should all be in line.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in the cultural space, we've got a lot of stuff around shaping, where we're identifying, protecting our heritage sites and elements through plans, and then there's also more in terms of some of the services and infrastructure we provide, as well as the advocacy roles in there. So yeah, and that is my picture.
Thanks, Ben. I'm wondering what the particular measures that are in here, like what's it going to look like for us, and what reporting is going to be done against whether we're meeting each of the sub outcomes, so that we'll know whether we're winning, losing, or otherwise on what our aspiration is.
Yeah, that's really good. We're looking into figuring out some monitoring for these outcomes. So we'll be trying to find some broad measures that we can track and report back in terms of each of these elements to say how are we tracking against each of these outcomes, each of these well-beings. It'll be separate to the LTP KPI stuff, which is more targeted, specific within the LTP and the annual plan coming through those annual reports. So we want to start some outcome monitoring here, and we'll start to just set it up and broaden it out so we can, get into more and more of that space. But yeah, we want to do that.
Because it'd be nice to have like a 6-monthly update, but then an annual report on how we've measured against these particular outcomes and given ourselves some lights, so we can sort of look at the trend of whether we're making progress towards achieving it or otherwise, and have something that's physically available that we can also talk to the community about and show them where we've really tried to make progress and where things have actually been maybe historically okay because we've got natural advantages in those particular areas, but we might be trying to shift the dial a wee bit.
Yeah. So we would like to set up like a data portal thing, you can see some of the graphs and where they're moving and things like that, and then report back and sort of say what's happening here. This is what the outcomes we wanted to achieve. This is what the data is showing. What does this actually mean as well? So we're wanting to do that and setting ourselves up to achieve that as well.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Does someone else have their light on just before? Yeah. Are you okay? Yep. Anything else, Ben?
Not on the outcomes, no.
No, we can move on then.
Okay, great. That pretty much concludes the workshop that we had for you today. Working through that. What I just wanted to share with you while we have some time is an update to our schedule or a timetable. Knowing that we've juggled a few workshops around the side of year, and we've got some coming up in the new year. So we do have another workshop next week on the 13th of December. So that's looking at what the CLTP could potentially look like. And then some more time at the end of January next year to sort of look more about what those big consultation items could look like and what we'd like to take out to the community, and revisit anything that we've seen this side of Christmas. I've called it finishing the foundations, but in early February, we're also looking at bringing forward the rest of what I call the I don't want to diminish it, but the administrative side of the LTP, where we're looking at our looking at our strategies and our policies and all the things that we need to have in place to enable us to go through audit and get to consultation. So it's about finishing off those, polishing off a lot of the work that you've seen come through in workshops to date. And then we're planning in some time to be able to have an opportunity to have an early review of the consultation document and what that's looking like before we progress that through to adoption. And we're aiming to do that towards the end of March. But we'll firm up some of these dates a little bit more, but this is generally what we're working towards as we lead into consultation with the community.
Yep.
Shane.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report in total. With regards to heritage and cultural taonga, and noting that there's requirements under the Act to take into account, and we continually mention it in this particular heritage and culture within our plans, documents and strategies. Do you have a cost figure that future-proofs the protection of significance, and also referring to our mana whenua as well, identify, I guess, significant sites of cultural taonga, tuku iho. And I bring it up because actually I visited the Pou at Kaiapua Pa e Whaia yesterday, and here it's saying, you know, there's identified sites that are of interest. So that would, to me, be one of those particular wahi tapu which needs care, in my humble opinion. So the question is, what's the dollar value? Are we on target? Not only achieving that, but also our significant historical value from the settlements that have.
I haven't got a dollar figure, but certainly in terms of this document, indicates that we will, through a regulatory type of framework, protect those heritage items. We do that through the district plan. So there's areas of significance to Māori and other areas, Bob, that are identified. We don't identify particular sites, obviously, because of the significance of those sites. So that's the main way that we protect heritage and cultural values, is through a regulatory function through the district plan. In terms of the quantum of money, I'm not too sure what you're referring to, and I haven't got a clear answer.
I was only referring to our strategy around heritage funding and that type of thing, but really, I guess we're doing the required. What is the expectation moving forward, or what is the ultimate goal? And I guess that refers back to what you're talking about, Sam.
Well, we have got various strategies underway in terms of the heritage strategy. We've got funds that are available, and we're pooling those funds under a single administrative type of framework. So there's certainly opportunities through those funds in a non-regulatory sense to provide some protection.
Thank you.
Wonder, as we've got a wee bit of time on hand, I'm a wee bit concerned, I suppose, or a wee bit perhaps not clear in my mind about the progress of this LTP. My personal feeling is that I'm getting a lot of very process-driven information, but I'm also concerned that I'm not seeing the numbers, or as a governor giving you good enough feedback, the staff good enough feedback as to our expectations of what an LTP number might look like. And I guess I'm sort of feeling a bit of governor envy when I'm seeing sort of other organisations on our boundaries who are coming out with numbers and being able to debate the wheres or why fares of what makes up that number. And I'm just concerned, are we getting ourselves into a pathway where the time becomes this short and as a group of governors we're going to have an LTP which largely we might rubber stamp and send to our community, which doesn't reflect the views of the governorship group around our desire to see, or my personal desire to see some restraint and some conservatism, which is my personal view. So if I can put that to you and just get some feedback.
Thank you for that very valid point. And one of the areas I was going to address with councillors today and part of my one-on-one time, which we were going to do shortly, is raising some awareness as in regards to our Magic Queue system and the fact that there has been an upgrade implemented into Magic Queue at the same time related to the long-term plan. In hindsight, upgrading the Magic Queue long-term plan financial system at the same time as running the LTP was a good quality learning of not to do that. And as a result, what is happening is that we're not in a position to have brought the numbers to you any sooner. We are aiming to do that next week. But we are not without some challenges, and we're currently working with Magic with regards to getting some expertise on site to make sure that the platform upgrade will enable us to bring some numbers through. We certainly would like to do it this side of Christmas if it's possible. And the worst case scenario, it'll be early the new year. But let's not shy away from the fact that similar to what a lot of other councils have come out with around the country, we are without a doubt expecting a double digits in terms of teens, and some of that will be driven purely by inflationary pressures and all of the other costs that are associated. So it's a very fair question, and I certainly understand that as a governor you want to see the numbers as soon as possible. We will endeavour to bring those numbers to you as soon as possible, as soon as we can ensure that the platform that we're using allows us to produce those numbers. But please be in no doubt that we are realistically looking at something that is in the double digits and in the teens.
Numbers are great, but options are better as well. What is the optionality around X versus Y equals, K? And
that's what we wish to bring to you as a suite of options. So as an example, our current policy states 6%. Ideally, what we would like to bring through is a range of options of, if we were to stay at the 6%, what would that look like? And I'm plucking figures out of my head here. If we were at the 10%, what does that look like? And putting the capital projects against that so that councillors have got the opportunity to guide us as to what you would like to see in terms of the range of options that we would put in front. And of course, they can be moved around. And ideally, we will run a process where we will have a live document so we can change the numbers as we have the discussions, so that it almost gives you a real-time view of what that might look like.
Yeah. It's a hardy annual that we construct our budgets on cost, and then set the rates. We've created almost a social contract with our ratepayers around 6%, which was, even that was higher than what we wanted to do on our general rate increase. So it's that challenge to us, I suppose, about what that looks like. And is our methodology the right way of doing it? It's an unusual business that creates its cost structure and then sets its income to match it, whereas most people have a income and make their expenses get under their expenditure. And we're getting tension into it is difficult, Sharon, because it's all too easy for us to set a high rates increase to cover lax budgeting or productivity.
What I can say is that I'm very aware of that natural tension and the process, and you will see this in the presentation, hopefully that we'll be bringing next week, is that I've put that natural tension into the organisation, and I will use an example in terms of additional FTE that may be required, rather than just assume that we're going to put that additional FTE as a two councillors to say we need this more FTE. Actually, we're looking at what are the other revenue sources that could be generated to offset costs, where are some saving opportunities, and we have applied a risk matrix across, say, the likes of personnel as an example, as to what would be the impact on this role if we didn't have it, etc. So we've been through a really thorough process that has put that natural tension in place, so that we're not coming as a lolly shop scramble saying we want what we're coming forward with as a well thought out proposition.
One of the challenges we face, and some of the newer councillors, is the change in our expenditure profile. And I think traditionally the core of roading was our biggest cost centre. If you look at our cost centres now, roading is relatively minor. You know, you're talking, I think one of the huge growth areas is community services and facilities, which I think is now $33 every $100 a rate take, versus historically it was about $7. So the change of our expenditure profile has been huge. And one of the questions we always ask ourselves is, have we really signed up for this level of service, or has it been incrementally built into our expenditure and now it's almost irreversible? So those are some of the things that I'd like us to think about in the LTP, is a change in expenditure profile. Is the profile warranted or still desired? And if so, let's vote on that and move,
Yeah, and in terms of, again, what we will bring forward is very much that in mind, and in terms of we're also bringing a level of pragmatism with regards to this LTP too, but also recognising that we are an area of significant growth, and the rationale behind the information that we'll be bringing forward is also recognising that if we don't keep up with the area of growth, we will start stepping backwards, and we will end up with a cost going forward too. So everything you've talked about, I can tell you that we have built that natural tension into our thoughts and thinking, and very much around where we can get operational savings as well, as opposed to we just want more. But we look forward to the discussions.
Thank you, and for raising those things, Grant. Malcolm?
Yeah, I'd just like to take us back to the cultural outcomes refresh part here. We're talking about a district which values its culture and heritage. I'm not sure we do. Our heritage fund is pitiful. Having an historic property and having applied to the funding, the level of applications is always higher than the amount of funding that's in the fund. I'm aware of a property which is recently classified as heritage. It has had a significant hit on its value because of that. And in the district plan reply to the people who submitted against such a thing, it said your compensation will be that you can apply to the Heritage Grants Fund for upkeep on your property. Well, the Heritage Grants Fund has not enough money in it, and that's just one property. I also, just looking back at the rates remission policy we've just gone through, and it says that heritage properties who have voluntarily submitted to be a heritage property can get a rates remission. Those that are involuntary don't. And I don't really think that that is respecting the area's heritage and culture. So perhaps I could have a conversation with Tim offline about that.
Great, Malcolm. Will be the dollars and stuff is a future discussion that'll be part of the conversation at a future stage. Shane?
just further to Grant's conversation around expenditure and operational expenditure, the differences and the natural tension, the information that does get reported back will have the expenditure items. There was a question I asked last week around audit and risk, 35 million, I think it is, for operational expenditure of community services and facilities. It's a lump sum that's comparable to the 70.5 operational for transport. So looking at it from perhaps a community perspective, you could see that, but then it's good to understand how we arrived there and what its specific purpose is and the importance of it. So that was my question.
Yeah. So thank you for that. What I would also reflect back on is that the pre-engagement that we've had from the community and the feedback, and it's become very clear that perhaps how the LTPs and the key priority areas and focus that were on in previous years, we can see that our community has shifted. So in terms of the growth of community services and facilities, that was required, at the last LTP. So hence, the growth in community services and services around that was, I would say, in recognition of the feedback that councillors had from the community. We are certainly in our pre-engagement getting a different sense of feedback that it may not necessarily be about more community facilities and actually more around protecting the green space and connectivity within communities. Public transport is coming through quite strongly. So I think it's pretty clear that this LTP focus is going to be different to the previous ones, where perhaps it isn't that same level of investment into community facilities and services, and that it actually takes a different approach in terms of housing, public transport, etc. So we will see that shift, and I just remind you of the pre-engagement feedback that you have heard that staff have presented about the messages that are coming through really clearly around the community aspirations.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, just the Community Heritage Fund, I agree with Malcolm. It's been quite hard with the funds that we've had lately, and there's been the odd people in the community that feel it doesn't show them the benefit that they need. So when are we going to discuss that costings, or what will the fund will be?
That'll be part of the forthcoming presentations, and certainly I think there is a proposal to increase the Heritage Fund quite significantly. But again, money's tight, so it'll be up to you guys to decide where your priorities lie. Where were the specifics on the funds coming? Sorry to put you on the spot. You brought a council paper that had some figures in it 2 or 3 weeks ago in terms of all the funds, is that correct?
Yeah, yes. In terms of process and process changes that were recommended and which were subsequently accepted by council, the next step is a piece of work pulling together the implications in terms of for the community grants fund in totality, as well as the financial implications of the various strategies that council has already committed to, and so that there is complete visibility and transparency of council about the financial implications that it may or may not have visibility over. So that's in train, and we're still there's a priority around getting some dollars and some numbers in front of council prior to Christmas. But I would imagine that paper is due to come in the new year as part of the process. Jen's well aware of that, and it fits into the process underway, as I understand it.
And I'm sure we'll get lots of submissions through that part of the process as well. So there'll be probably a couple of bites of the cherry.
Thank you, Sam. Look, I think just in terms of, we're talking about LTP, we're talking about community aspirations, we're talking about what the future potential rates may look like. I think, to be fair, we can't be naive here. This is going to be a significant challenge in terms of this long-term plan. And, you know, we're probably going to present a set of numbers to councillors in a way that, or at a level that you haven't seen before for this district. And, you know, it's about recognising that and recognising that you're perhaps going to have some significant conversations and challenges and discussions, and some of it may be well about what we're not going to do, what we're going to disinvest from, also balanced with making sure that we position ourselves well for growth, because we cannot avoid that.
Thanks, Sharon. And just reflecting on the decisions that we've seen around the country, Hamilton is in the 20s, Hutt is in the high teens. You know, and so you've mentioned 6 and 10 here today, but there's been, you know, 6 used to be a high number. You know, we were thinking at 3 or 4, and now 6 is like way too high. But you know, 10 might not be enough for what we're thinking here. And so councillors, like, we all need to be aware that the conversation could be up to in the 20s if we wanted to do everything that everyone wants to do. You know, but can the community afford that? That's the balance. And so then it's going to need to come down to thinking about what we rationalise through the process to come up with a number that we think we can live with, while also recognising that at the moment, I think Selwyn, we hold ourselves, you know, here compared to a pack, and we think that we're delivering well for our community. And how much are we wanting to allow Selwyn just to be a good normal part of New Zealand, providing a similar level of service to other places rather than being an excellent place? And as that change happens, how would we then not stop it being a place where Selwyn doesn't provide the things that are future looking and ahead for the community still to come in a high growth area, and the change that might affect over the next 10 years as well. So there's the immediacy of what we can afford to do and the projects that are here, but it's also some long-term thinking about what are we continuing to set Selwyn up for into the future. And so the range of options that I'm expecting we'll see will be from the single digits through to the 20s and numbers in between for us to play with.
That's absolutely correct, and that is the intent of bringing a document that could be a live document that we can move different things around based on the discussions that we have.
Thank you, Lydia.
I have received quite an amount of correspondence over the past couple of days from constituents around a Stuff article that states that. Which is quite misleading, saying that we're looking at a 25% rates increase. And that's been quite frustrating to deal with that because we don't have the numbers. And so, yeah, just making you aware of what is.
Can you forward the article to us and we'll follow up on that?
Yeah, I'll find it. Thank you.
Thanks. That brings us to the end of the LTP discussion. All of the transport speed management group here, we could just carry on straight into that. Great. Tim and Jen.